I thought of beginning at the end of where I would normally have begun, if that isn't paradoxical, and to reply to a question or observation that I get almost everywhere I go, which is, well, your book is right about saying that the holy texts are full of evil, hatred, bigotry, superstition, misleading ideas, all the rest of it. But why not think about all the people who are godly and faithful and spiritual and who, as it were, don't buy any of this? Well, I could not have written a book that was individually addressed to every person who cherry-picks religion or who decides that it's up to them to take it a la carte. I give you the example of a Baptist with whom I debated in North Carolina last week. I got him this close. I said, "You're a Calvinist, right?" He said, "Yeah, I certainly am." I said, "Well, do you think in that case that either I or anyone else in this room is going to eternal punishment for what they think?" And he didn't like the question. I think for two reasons. One, as you know, people in the South are very wedded to their tradition of hospitality. It isn't considered polite in Dixie terms to have a guest to the Unitarian Church hall and tell him that he's going to be tortured with red-hot pincers for eternity. But I didn't think that was the whole story. I thought that he didn't quite want to say it either. And in fact, I thought he probably didn't really, when he examined his conscience, which, a faculty with which I was willing to credit him, didn't really believe it. But everywhere I go, they say, "Oh, but you say that Calvin was bad, but lots of Baptists are good." No, let's make up our minds about this, I think. Let's not just feel, let's not just emote. Let us think and let us examine the text, because these are the only things that we really have that we can rely upon. Either this is the Word of God or it's not. If it's not, it isn't. Well, either A or not A is a principle of formal and all other kinds of logic. Either it's moral, to move to my main point, or it is not, to believe this. And what I've noticed is that moral people refuse to answer to the precepts of religion when you confront them with it. People of ordinary ethics, and they say ordinary faith, will, when you ask them, well, why is there no hell in the Old Testament? Why is it only with Jesus that eternal punishment, the gentle Nazarene, comes into our lives? Is that what you think or believe? Oh, not really. No, he's a loving Jesus. He's a Jesus of love. Where do you get this from? What's your authority for it? I put myself out and say testable things which I'm willing to be, will be, hope to be, need to be challenged upon. Why won't they do the same? If this were otherwise, I wouldn't have had to write, or felt I needed to write, this book. If it were the case that religion was a la carte and was another form of ethics, just another way of being benign, or of giving money to charity, or of being a philanthropist, then the following observations of mine wouldn't be true. Here are the observations. They're at random. You could add to them yourself. The parties of God in Iraq would not be trying to reduce Iraqi civil society to the level of pre-Afghanistan or post-Somalia. Not by killing unbelievers, but by killing other Muslims. And there would have been by now a fatwa, either from the Shia authorities in Qum, or from the Sunni authorities at Al-Azhar University, so the supposed Vatican of the Sunni Muslim world, saying it is not in fact permissible, in fact it's condemned, to blow up each other's mosques, to kill each other's children, to destroy the societies, the families, the lives, the property of other Muslims. No such pronouncement has been made. They can't find it in themselves even to condemn that. People say, should I take the text literally? I say, I don't know. All I know is what the texts actually say. If they can't use these for condemnation, where am I in this? Perhaps it will be found by the rabbinate of some Jewish community, Orthodox, Reform or Conservative, meet and right to say that it isn't the case that Jewish settlers on the West Bank and Gaza hope by their colonization and theft of other people's land to bring on the Messiah and to make Armageddon that nice little bit nearer that would bring about the end of days. Why don't we find that the rabbinate can find it in itself to condemn this? Though we hear that the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, Mr. Ratzinger, as I always think of him, cannot but think of him, now says, after a great deal of rumination, that all those parents, for all those centuries, whose children were condemned to limbo because they had not been baptized before they died in childbirth, were in fact not there. It wasn't a real place after all. The hideous cruelty, the believing parents who thought, that's where my child is now, wailing, lost, forgotten in limbo because I didn't remember the holy water in time before the death. The Pope should be able to say such a callous thing, such an evil thing, a wicked thing, immoral thing, and still be taken seriously as a man able to make pronouncements. I should say, well, we perhaps shouldn't have listened to St. Augustine on this point, but or many others, such as the Holocaust, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the mass murder in Spanish America, the destruction of the Christian Orthodox non-Catholics of the Balkans and the Ukraine. We're ready to apologize for all that, but only so that we can be infallible all over again. This is not morally serious, and it's not my indictment of them, it is their indictment of themselves. A Catholic who says, you don't have to believe what the Pope says, I must inquire of them. To what extent then are you a Catholic, sir? By what authority do you repudiate this obviously evil, man-made doctrine? Well, that's why I begin at the end, because I want to anticipate, since I'm in Berkeley, California, the mush-headed view that there is, after all, a sort of spiritual background to this, an ethical character to it. I would go to invite everyone who have time too, because Mr. Hedges is ahead of me and I'm nearly halfway through my remarks. You've got lots of time to think about it. I want someone to get up tonight and say that they can name a stand made, moral or ethical, a stand of moral courage or political courage made by any religious person that could not have been made by someone who thought that the whole idea of God was ridiculous to begin with. Does anyone not understand the challenge? If by the end of tonight no one can do that, I think my point will have been carried. It is not the case, it simply is not the case that we get our ethics from religion, or can derive it from holy men who believe they are interpreting the will of God and understanding his mind. It simply is not the case. Our morality, our human solidarity, our innate need to help one another, my wish, for example, that I can give a pint of blood to a fellow sufferer without losing one. My blood will be replenished. He will get a pint of blood, or she will, and I don't lose one. The pleasure I get from that is innate. It's part of my mammalian nature, which also makes me rejoice in the death of my enemies, and the discomfiture of my foes, and even sometimes the embarrassment of my friends. I can't change this in myself. Neither can you. Pray as you may. You won't be able to change that about yourself. And I say to the Christians while I'm at it, go love your own enemies, by the way. Don't be loving mine. I think the enemies of civilization should be beaten and killed and defeated, and I don't make any apology for it. And I think it's sickly and stupid and suicidal to say that we should love those who hate us and wish to kill us and our children and burn our libraries and destroy our society. I have no patience with this nonsense. Well, that's my preface. I should say it's a great honor to be debating this with Chris Hedges. A couple of times I've nearly got killed in the Middle East by being confused with him. Greater dislike hath no man. And, the only worse experience I ever had was when I worked for the New Statesman in the old days, the English equivalent of the Nation magazine, the New Statesman, and was asking for an interview with the leader of the Phalange Party, a Lebanese fascist Catholic militia, who, when he heard me say, I'm Christopher Hitchens from the New Statesman, babbled into the phone to his genocidal boss. This is important. It's Mr. Christopher from the New Testament. I'd rather be called Hedges than have that, but look, I'll make it quick. Religion comes from the stupid infancy of our species. I won't say race, because that was when we believed in race. We thought the species was differentiated by tribe. That's how stupid we were. And we thought God made covenants with particular tribes. Can anything be more hateful or ridiculous than this? And we didn't know there was a germ theory of disease, because we thought that leprosy and typhoid and bubonic plague were punishments. And we didn't know we lived on a cooling planet with a thin crust, so that volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis seemed like a judgment. And we didn't know bat. We lived on a round planet that went round a rather remote from the rest of the galaxy round star. Didn't know any of this, but they got in first, didn't they, the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews? They were ahead because, as you will know from your own experience, intelligent people, given what we have, pattern-seeking minds, will look for explanation even in the absence of evidence. And as you also know, even smart people would prefer a conspiracy theory to no theory at all if the evidence is missing or is warped. And they got there first, and we have to live with what they told us. They told us that all of this was true, and that in return for regarding ourselves as less than the dust, as people born into original sin, as the Quran says, made from a clot of blood at a whim of God, or as the Christians say, from dust and mud, where even your lowliest rib will suffice to make that even lesser creature a woman. That in return for this masochistic, abject, eternally apologetic, guilt-ridden, fear of sex, hatred of the female genitalia, revulsion from the birth canal except as a one-way street, name me one god, including Buddha, who didn't come from a virgin, and see how unhealthy and unwholesome this masochism is. That in return for this abjection and shame, that we could be consoled by the thought that the whole whirling galaxy and constellation, the magnificence of the known universe, the entire extraordinary Milky Way, was designed with us in mind. The Me galaxy. The You constellation.